One quiet village was losing its history. A creeping blight devoured memories, erasing songs, stories, and the very names of ancestors from the minds of the people. Anduin, a young historian, watched his home fade around him, a slow and silent erasure of everything they were. Driven by a desperate need to uncover a forgotten truth, he made a pivotal decision. He would seek out the legendary River of Echoes, a fabled waterway whispered to hold the memories of all time. By the end of this journey, you will understand how the past can be the most powerful weapon for saving the future. What forgotten truth lies buried in the river's flow, and what price must be paid to remember it? We often find strength in stories from long ago. Where are you joining this tale from today? And what is the hour like for you? What is one memory you would fight to never lose? A pale dawn light found Anduin at the edge of the Whispering Woods. He carried only a pack and a set of star charts, so old the parchment felt like dried leaves. The forest did not welcome him. Its trees seemed to lean closer, their rustling leaves forming words just below hearing. These were the psychic echoes, and they fed on his deepest fears. A whisper would suggest he was abandoning his village to its fate. Another would murmur that the river was only a myth. He gripped his charts tighter, focusing on the celestial patterns, using the cold, constant truth of the stars to silence the warm, twisting lies in his head. His departure had sparked a fragile hope back home, but that same act had painted a target on his back. Something was aware of his quest. He felt it as a prickle on his neck, a sense of being watched from the deepening shadows. The path forked ahead. One route wound safely around the forest's heart, adding days to his journey. The other plunged directly into the Serpent's Canyon, a place where time itself was said to fray and twist. He stood at the crossroads, the weight of every forgotten memory pressing upon him. Taking the long way meant possibly arriving too late to save anything. With a sharp intake of breath, he turned toward the canyon. This was no longer just a search for answers, it was a race. The Blight was not a mindless force, it was a hunter, and he was now its prey. The canyon walls rose like jagged teeth, and the air within hummed with a strange energy. Hours seemed to stretch and contract, his shadow lengthening and shrinking without the sun moving. He pressed on, driven by a courage he was only just discovering. When he finally stumbled out onto the open plains, the very wind seemed changed. It carried a new sound, a distant, liquid murmur that resonated not in his ears, but in his mind. It was a whisper of immense age and profound promise. The river was calling, and its first true echo held both the answers he sought and the perils he could not yet fathom. The river's murmur was a compass in his mind, leading him to a crumbling archway, half buried in the earth. Beyond it lay a circular courtyard, its center dominated by a stone altar. Set into the altar's surface was a complex pattern of inlaid stones, all of them dark and dormant, except for a few that pulsed with a faint, internal light. This was a puzzle lock, a final test from the river's first guardians. Anduin traced the star charts from his pack over the pattern, his fingers trembling as he aligned celestial maps with terrestrial stone. When the last glowing piece clicked into its rightful place, the entire design blazed with a soft, blue-white radiance. A single, flawless crystal rose from the altar's heart. He reached for it, and the world dissolved. A vision consumed him. He was not himself, but a witness to the dawn of time. He saw primordial forces weaving the river into existence, not as water, but as a liquid tapestry of time and experience. Every joy, every sorrow, every story ever lived was a thread in its current. This was not a mere record, it was a living, breathing entity. The insight was staggering, but the light of the awakening crystal had also acted as a beacon. A form coalesced from the mist beside the shrine, a spectral warden clad in ancient armor, its eyes burning with cold fire. You trespass upon sacred ground, its voice echoed in Anduin's skull. The memories are not for the taking, they must be earned. The warden advanced, and Anduin knew a physical fight was impossible. This was a battle of intent. Prove your purpose is not vanity, the specter demanded. Prove you are not here to steal power for yourself. Anduin's mind raced, discarding grand speeches and lofty promises. They were just words. The only truth he had to offer was a raw and painful one. He closed his eyes, and instead of shielding his mind, he opened it. He showed the warden the memory of his own mother's face, a face the Blight was slowly erasing from the world. He let the specter feel the profound, aching loss of watching a loved one fade not from life, but from thought itself. It was a private grief, offered as public proof. The warden halted, its fiery gaze softening into something resembling sorrow. You carry a true heart, it resonated, the harsh echo replaced by a low hum. You understand that memory is its own kind of love. The bond forged in that moment was fragile, built on shared understanding, but time was short. The blight you face is no new sickness, the warden revealed. It is an ancient entity of oblivion, one we imprisoned long ago. Its prison is failing. To confront it, you will need the Heartstone, an artifact that can focus the river's own power against the void. This new knowledge was a heavy weight. He was not just recovering lost stories, he was stepping into an ancient war. The warden gestured toward the ever-present sound of the river. Its currents have shifted over the ages, it explained. The greatest repository of knowledge, the Sunken library, now lies beneath the waters. Its texts hold the secret to finding the Heartstone. You must dive into the depths of memory itself, historian. What you seek lies buried not in sand, but in time. The river's current felt like liquid thought, cold and dense, with a million forgotten whispers. Anduin plunged into the depths, the water offering no resistance to his body, only to his mind. All around him, the Sunken library stood as a cathedral of lost time. Shelves of crystalline stone spiraled into the gloom, holding not books, but swirling spheres of light, each one a captured moment or a recorded life. His goal was the innermost chamber, where the Tome of Tides was sealed, but the library was not a static place. He had to navigate carefully, avoiding shimmering vortices in the water, temporal eddies where a single misstep could pull him in and spit him out moments later, aged by years. He focused on the flow of memories around him, using their steady, sorrowful rhythm as a guide through the treacherous architecture. He reached the sealed chamber, its entrance marked by a door of solid water that yielded only to a focused thought of pure intent. Inside, the Tome of Tides rested on a pedestal, not a book of pages, but a single, polished river stone that glowed with an inner tide. The moment his fingers closed around it, the chamber dissolved. He was no longer Anduin. He was an old librarian, his hands trembling as he sealed this very chamber, the roar of the advancing Blight echoing through the library's halls. He felt the librarian's crushing fear, the certainty of doom, but also a fierce, unbreakable resolve to protect this one last secret. The memory ended as the library collapsed around the man, the weight of that final duty pressing on Anduin's own heart as the vision released him. He surged back to the surface, gasping, the Tome of Tides clutched in his hand. On the riverbank, a critical choice faced him. He could stay here for days, perhaps weeks, studying the tome's contents to fully understand its wisdom. Or he could move now, with the Blight spreading and his village fading. He made his choice in a single, sharp breath. He would travel and decipher the tome as he went, trusting his wits over perfect preparation. It was a gamble, but time was a luxury he no longer possessed. As he walked, he poured his focus into the stone. It yielded its knowledge not in words, but in impressions and images. It spoke of the Heartstone, not as a gem or a weapon, but as a living vessel. The artifact he sought was a person, the last living descendant of the river's first caretakers, a bloodline carrying the legacy of the river itself in their very being. The revelation struck him with the force of a physical blow, halting him in his tracks. Everything he thought he knew about his quest shifted in an instant. The solution was not to find a thing, but to find a person. His eyes lifted from the glowing stone, scanning the riverbanks with a new, desperate urgency, searching the shifting mists for any sign of the lost lineage he was now destined to protect. The river's mist coiled around him like cold fingers as he ran. He had barely a moment to register the shift in the air before it struck. A corrupted echo, a shard of the Blight-given form, erupted from the water. It was a hollow, writhing thing, all grasping shadows and a hungering silence that pulled at his very thoughts. Its target was the Tome of Tides, the warmth of the stone in his satchel, a beacon in the spectral gloom. Anduin scrambled backward as the creature lunged, not for his body, but for the bag slung across his shoulder. He felt a sickening lurch, a visceral tearing sensation, as the echo tried to siphon not just the artifact, but the memories tied to it, the old librarian's resolve, the Warden's solemn warning, his own mother's fading smile. The ground beneath his feet gave way, not to water, but to something else. Islands of solidified memory flickered into existence across the river's surface, glowing platforms of recalled joy and solidified sorrow that formed and dissolved with the caprice of a dying thought. He leaped from one to the next, the echo flowing over the water in pursuit. Each unstable foothold threatened to crumble back into the current, taking a piece of the past with it. The creature did not just chase him, it tormented him. In the shimmering surface of the river, fleeting visions appeared. He saw his village, the Blight thicker now, faces he knew turning blank and hollow. He heard the desperate, fading cries of his neighbors. Turn back, the echo seemed to hiss without sound. You are already too late. Their fate is sealed. Despair was a cold weight in his chest, threatening to pull him under. But then he remembered the Warden's lesson. The battle fought not with force, but with truth. As the echo closed in for a final lunge, Anduin stopped running and turned to face it. He did not raise a weapon. Instead, he opened his mind and reflected the echo's own essence back at it. He showed the creature not his memories, but the void it represented, the absolute emptiness of a world without stories, without love, without a single soul to remember it. The corrupted echo recoiled, its form writhing in a silent scream as it confronted the absolute desolation of its own purpose. For a heartbeat, it shattered into 1,000 glittering motes of forgotten pain. Anduin did not wait. He lunged for the safety of the far bank, but the strap of his satchel, weakened by the struggle, snapped. The bag, with his precious star charts and what little food he had, tumbled into the river and vanished into the depths. He was alone now, with only the clothes on his back and the Tome of Tides clenched in his fist. The victory was hollow. The Blight had tested him and learned his strength. It knew he could fight back with memory itself, and the next attacker would be ready for that. As the last fragments of the echo dissipated into the mist, a final image flickered within them, not of despair, but of a place. A secluded valley, lush and green, cradled by towering peaks, a sanctuary untouched by the creeping gray. It was a glimpse, a secret ripped from the enemy, a possible haven for the last descendant. With nothing left to lose, he fixed the image in his mind and let the river's current guide his steps toward the distant mountains. The mountains gave way to a hidden valley, a place where the air itself felt still and heavy, like a held breath. This was the sanctuary ripped from the fading echo, a pocket of the world where time seemed to hesitate, lingering in the golden light that filtered through the leaves. In the center of this impossible peace stood a small cottage, surrounded by a garden of flowers that shimmered with a soft, internal light. They were memory lilies, each bloom holding a single, perfect recollection. Tending them was an old woman, her movements slow and deliberate, her face a map of quiet years. This was Alara. Anduin approached with the caution one would use near a sleeping creature, his every instinct telling him he had found the linchpin of his entire quest. She was the last caretaker, the living Heartstone, but when he spoke of the Blight and the river, her eyes, which had been calm pools, turned to flint. "You bring the storm to my doorstep," she said, her voice brittle with a fear kept fresh by centuries of hiding. "My purpose is to remain forgotten. To awaken my power is to shine a beacon in the darkness, and everything will be lost." She refused him, turning back to her flowers, a wall of silence as formidable as any canyon wall. Anduin faced a critical choice. He could argue, could try to convince her with the desperate logic of his dying village. But he saw the deep weariness in her, the weight of a solitude so long it had become a shell. So he did the one thing he had not planned. He put his quest aside. For days, he simply helped her. He weeded the garden, not speaking of the Blight. He mended the fence around her cottage, not mentioning the Heartstone. He showed respect for her peace through the quiet diligence of his actions, proving he was not just another force come to take something from her. He was learning the language of her solitude, and in that quiet, a fragile trust began to grow. It could not last. The stillness of the valley was the first thing to break. A graying at the edges of the green, a whisper of decay on the wind. The Blight's scouts, drawn by the residue of his earlier battle, had found them. Dark tendrils, like searching roots, began to creep over the mountain pass, probing the valley's ancient wards. They moved with a horrible patience, tasting the air, inching closer to the cottage and the garden of glowing lilies. As the first tendril of absolute nothingness brushed against a memory lily, causing its light to flicker and die, Alara looked from the dying flower to Anduin's weary, resolute face. The time for hiding was over. She placed a hand on his arm, her decision made. The Blight is here. It is time, she said, her voice now steady with a resolve he had not heard before. I will teach you how to wake the river inside me. The ritual began not with a grand incantation, but with a shared silence at the river's source. Alara guided Anduin's hands to the water, its surface shimmering with the pure, unfiltered memories of a world being forgotten. Their task was to gently coax the river's own essence into her, to remind the slumbering Heartstone of its purpose. It was a delicate process, like using a single thread of light to reweave a tapestry from the inside out. Anduin focused, channeling the river's flow, feeling the ancient stories course through him and into Alara. A soft radiance began to bloom within her chest, a slow, hesitant dawn against the gathering twilight of the Blight. But light, no matter how gentle, casts a long shadow in the dark. The moment her power truly stirred, the world seemed to shudder. A psychic scream, vast and hollow, tore through the valley. The beacon had been lit. The Blight answered with a fury that turned the air to ice. Corrupted memories, given physical form as a corrosive gray vapor, poured over the ridge. They were fragments of despair and abandonment, and they hungered for the light now kindling within Alara. She was locked in the ritual, utterly vulnerable, her consciousness turned inward to the monumental task of awakening. Anduin moved without thought, placing his own body between her and the advancing tide. The memory vapor washed over him, and it was agony. It was not a burn on his skin, but a searing cold in his mind. It sought to devour his own recollections, to use his fears and doubts as weapons. He saw his village fall into absolute silence, every face turning to featureless stone. He felt the crushing weight of his own failure, yet he held his ground, his jaw clenched, his own memories of hope acting as a fragile shield. He sacrificed his sense of self, allowing the edges of his own past to fray and blur, to protect the core of hers. His sacrifice bought the precious seconds she needed. With a final, resonating pulse, Alara's transformation completed. The light within her blazed out, not as a destructive force, but as a wave of pure, clarifying remembrance. The corrosive vapor recoiled and dissipated, unable to exist in the face of such certain truth. She stood, no longer a frail old woman, but a figure of immense, serene power, her eyes holding the depth of the river itself. The victory was immediate and profound, but catastrophically brief. The valley, their sanctuary, was now the epicenter of a storm. From every direction, the land itself seemed to groan as the full, focused attention of the ancient oblivion turned upon them. The gray was not just advancing, it was converging. The entire Blight was marshalling for one final, overwhelming assault. Alara's gaze met Anduin's, the shared understanding passing between them in an instant. This hidden place was now a trap. There was only one direction left to go, to the very heart of the conflict. We must reach the Chrono Falls, she said, her voice now the steady rumble of the current. Where the river is born, it can be reborn. Where the Blight seeks to end time, we must make our final stand. Their flight down river became a desperate dance against the current of time itself. Anduin's hands blistered from hastily lashing reeds and fallen logs into rafts, while Alara, her eyes closed in deep concentration, guided them. She could feel the Blight's snares in the water, invisible temporal eddies that could age a person to dust in a heartbeat, or memory webs designed to trap a mind in a loop of its own regrets. Her renewed connection to the river was their only map through this treacherous terrain. As they navigated, a quiet exchange began to mend the gap between their ages. Alara spoke of the river's golden age, when cities of light lined its banks and people would come to listen to the whispers of their own ancestors. In turn, Anduin told her of the world outside her valley, of simple villages like his own, of songs sung in taverns and children playing in fields. A world worth fighting for, a world she had been too afraid to remember. This fragile trust was constantly tested. Corrupted echoes swarmed the banks, their silent screams a palpable pressure in the air. They were forced away from the safer, slower currents into white water rapids that threatened to shatter their flimsy rafts, and jagged canyons where falling rocks seemed to aim for them. Exhaustion became a third companion, its weight growing with each passing league. The river itself was changing, turning their enemies' advance into a visible horror. The once clear waters grew cloudy and thick, like liquid ash. The gentle, guiding whispers of the past were being systematically silenced, replaced by a hollow, static hiss. It was a physical sickness, a creeping nihilism that sought to drain all color and meaning from the world. The final test of their fledgling partnership came at a broken stone bridge. A massive chasm gaped before them, the only crossing a collection of crumbling arches. As they picked their way across, the ancient stones, weakened by the Blight's corrosive touch, gave way beneath Alara's feet. Anduin lunged, his hand closing around her wrist as she fell. He hauled her back onto the solid part of the bridge, but the rest of the structure collapsed into the murky water below, leaving them stranded. Their only hope was a faintly glowing ledge on the far side of the chasm, a platform of solidified memory from a happier time. It was too far to reach with a normal jump. "You must trust me," Alara said, her voice strained but clear. "You must trust that my memory is strong enough to hold you." Anduin did not hesitate. He took 3 running steps and leaped into the open air. For a terrifying moment, he was falling, but then his feet landed on solid, warm light. The memory ledge glowed brighter under his weight, firm and real, a testament to the power of their shared faith. That faith would soon be all they had left. A new sound began to rise above the river's sickly murmur, a deep, thunderous roar that vibrated in their bones. It was the sound of a cataclysm, of time crashing over a precipice. The Chrono Falls were near, and with them, the end of their journey and the beginning of the end of everything. The thunder of the Chrono Falls was a physical force, a roar that shook the stone beneath their feet. Before them, the river did not simply drop. It shattered into a billion glittering fragments, a waterfall where every single drop was a crystallized memory, each one flashing with a life lived long ago. At the base of this impossible cataract, a central stone plinth rose from the mist, its peak the only place from which the river's heart could be mended. Alara immediately began her preparations, her hands tracing ancient symbols in the air as she drew upon the river's fading strength. Anduin's path was clear and brutal. He had to climb. The stone of the waterfall was treacherously smooth, slick with the condensation of countless recollections. With each grip, a memory, not his own, exploded in his mind. One handhold flooded him with the pure, unbridled joy of a child's first steps. The next seared him with the gut-wrenching grief of a final farewell. He was scaling a cliff face, made of the entire world's emotional extremes, and the relentless barrage threatened to shatter his concentration, to send him tumbling back into the abyss of forgotten time. The true battle erupted below. The shifting gray vapor of the Blight coalesced into a single, shadowy entity, a void given purpose. It did not attack the falls. It attacked Alara. Tendrils of absolute nothingness lashed out, seeking to sever her connection to the ritual, to consume the light of the Heartstone before it could be fully wielded. Anduin, clinging to the falls halfway up, felt the assault as a psychic shockwave. He watched a tendril of gray slice through the air, just feet from her head. His instinct was to let go, to fall back and defend her, but to abandon the climb now would mean ultimate failure for them both. It was the most difficult choice of his life. He closed his eyes for a single, agonizing second, and then he made it. He trusted her. He forced his focus back to the climb, his fingers digging into the next memory crystal, enduring another wave of foreign emotion. He chose to believe in her power, and in doing so, he gave her the space she needed to fight. The entire world was now unraveling. The edges of the river began to dissolve into silent, gray static. Whole sections of the memory waterfall simply winked out of existence, taking millennia of stories with them. The roar of the falls grew strained, punctuated by patches of terrifying quiet. The corruption was reaching its zenith, erasing the very substance of reality. With a final, gasping effort, Anduin hauled himself over the lip of the plinth. His hand, raw and bleeding, slapped against the cold, smooth stone at its center. In that instant, every remaining memory in the waterfall flashed in unison. The entire system of the river, from its source to its dying end, aligned into a single, resonant chord of time. The stone of the plinth turned to ice beneath Anduin's palms, a cold so profound it felt like touching the beginning of time itself. His task was not to push or pull, but to become a conduit. He opened his mind, and the river answered. It was not a gentle flow, but a deluge. The collective hope of every memory the river held surged through him. The first laugh of a newborn, the quiet comfort of a shared meal, the stubborn courage of a people facing a storm. He did not merely remember these moments, he became their vessel. This torrent of pure recollection solidified around Alara, a shimmering, translucent dome of light and feeling that hummed with the music of 10,000 lives. Inside that shield, she was safe to work. The moment she began to channel the Heartstone's true power, the boundaries of the world tore like parchment. The physical realm and the memory realm bled into one another. Ghostly soldiers from forgotten wars stood shoulder to shoulder with them, their spectral swords flashing against the encroaching gray. Farmers long turned to dust swung ethereal scythes at tendrils of nothingness. They were not alone. They were an army of echoes, fighting for the right to be remembered. The Blight entity recoiled from this unexpected solidarity, its form rippling with a frustration that shook the canyon. Then its voice slithered directly into Anduin's mind, a seductive, logical poison. "Your village can be spared," it whispered, painting a vivid image in his head. The gray recedes, every face is clear again. Your mother knows your name. All you must do is step aside, let the ritual fail. The old woman's life is a pittance to pay for all of them. The choice was a vise around his heart. He could save everyone he had ever loved by committing a single, silent act of betrayal. He looked at Alara, her form radiant within the shield of memory, and then back at the tempting vision of his saved home. His answer was not a shout, but a quiet, unwavering thought that resonated through the plinth. Some memories are too precious to ever bargain away. To trade one life for 1,000 would make a mockery of every story the river had ever told. It would be a victory for the void, a world saved but rendered meaningless. His defiance was not an attack, but a refusal. He chose the memory of a single act of courage over the promise of a safe and empty future. The effect on the Blight was immediate and visceral. It shuddered, its form losing cohesion as if starved. It fed on despair, on compromise, on the easy, selfish choices that led to oblivion. Selfless courage was a flavor it could not digest, a light that scorched its core. The opening was minuscule, a single heartbeat of weakness in the storm of annihilation, but it was enough. Seizing that fracture in the enemy's will, Alara's voice rose, no longer her own, but merged with the river's eternal song. The final incantation began, a single note of creation that held the weight of all time. That single note of creation became a wave. From the peak of the plinth, Alara released the full, focused power of the Heartstone. It was not an explosion, but an expansion. A brilliant, cleansing tide of pure white light that rolled down the length of the river. Where it touched the corrosive gray, the Blight did not burn, it remembered. The entity of oblivion shrieked, a sound of tearing silence, as the very memories it had consumed were reborn within it. The joy of a first kiss, the sorrow of a last goodbye, the simple warmth of a shared story, these were weapons it could not withstand. Its form, built on emptiness, was unwound by the weight of 1,000,000 lived experiences, dissolving into motes of light that rejoined the current. The river ran clear and vibrant once more, its waters singing with restored voices, but the victory had a terrifying cost. Alara was the source of this light, and as the wave poured out of her, she began to fade. She had become one with the river's heart, and the ritual demanded a total sacrifice. To save all memory, she was becoming a memory herself. Anduin felt it happening through their connection, a dreadful thinning of her presence in the world. From his place on the stone, he did not try to pull her back. Instead, he did something far more profound. He poured his own memories into the river, not as a shield, but as an anchor. He gave the current the memory of her weary hands, tending the glowing lilies. He offered the sound of her voice, brittle with fear, turning to steady resolve. He sent the image of her leaping across the chasm, trusting the memory ledge he had created. He wove the story of their shared journey into the very fabric of the cleansing tide, a tether of lived experience to ground her to the present. For a long, breathless moment, the wave of light consumed everything, and the fate of the river and its last caretaker hung in a blinding, silent balance. Then, slowly, the radiance began to recede. A profound silence fell, deeper than any that had come before. It was the quiet of a world holding its breath. And then, softly, it was broken. The gentle, familiar whisper of the restored river returned, its current now carrying a new story, the story of their sacrifice and of the fragile, enduring connection that had saved it all. The roar of the falls softened into the river's familiar, gentle whisper. Anduin found Alara on the bank, her form no longer blazing with power, but glowing with a soft, steady light, like a star seen through morning mist. She was alive, her connection to the Heartstone now a quiet, humming constant within her, no longer a secret to be hidden, but a truth to be honored. The blight was gone, scoured from the land by the river's own reborn clarity, yet the victory had etched itself into them both. They understood now that memory was not a fortress to be defended, but a garden to be tended, requiring both sunlight and rain, joy and sorrow, to truly thrive. A quiet urgency now warred with Anduin's relief. His village, his family, they were waiting in that spectral silence. Every instinct screamed for him to run home, to see the light restored to their eyes. But when he looked at Alara, he saw the immense weight of her renewed purpose, a duty meant for a lineage, now resting on a single pair of shoulders. The river was healed, but it was not safe. Leaving it unguarded now would make their entire sacrifice meaningless. His choice was made not out of obligation, but out of a deeper understanding. He would stay. Word of their stand at the Chrono Falls began to travel, not by messenger, but through the river itself, a ripple of hope in the current. The first few came cautiously, a young woman who could hear the whispers in the rain, a man whose dreams were filled with faces from centuries past. Anduin became their bridge, teaching them what he had learned of courage and sacrifice, while Alara guided them in the ancient ways of listening and channeling. He showed them that protecting memory was not about hiding from the world, but about engaging with it, about valuing every story, great and small. This new, shared guardianship wove a stronger tapestry than any solitary vigil ever could. It created a bond between the flowing timelessness of the river and the beating, present heart of the human world, an era of cooperation born from the brink of oblivion. As the first group of initiates gathered at the water's edge, their voices joining the river's song, Anduin felt a different current pull at him, one that led away from the source and back toward its mouth. The work here was begun, its foundation strong. His own story and the story of his people was waiting to be remembered. He looked toward the distant hills, ready to bring the river's echo home. The river's current carried him home like an old friend. This time, Anduin did not fight the water's flow, but read it, his fingers trailing through the cool stream, as if turning the pages of a familiar tale. He felt the subtle shifts in the current, the pathways of memory that offered safe passage, and his journey was swift and certain, a stark contrast to his desperate, stumbling flight into the unknown. When the familiar hills of his homeland rose on the horizon, the air itself felt different, lighter, charged with a fragile, returning vitality. The creeping gray was gone, replaced by the tentative green of new growth, pushing through soil that had been barren for so long. He was met at the village edge, not with the hollow stares he had feared, but with a quiet, awestruck reverence. They did not see the young historian who had left. They saw the man who had walked into legend and returned, his very presence a testament to a battle fought, and won in a realm beyond their sight. The weight of their hope was a heavier mantle than any he had yet worn. Integrating this new reality with the old rhythms of village life proved his next great challenge. How could he speak of temporal eddies and spectral wardens to people whose greatest concern was the coming harvest? The profound, silent understanding he shared with Alara felt galaxies away from the need to mend a fence or store grain for the winter. He saw the questions in their eyes, a mixture of gratitude and a faint, unspoken fear of the power he now seemed to represent. He knew then that he could not simply be their hero. He had to become their translator, a bridge between the river's eternal song and their daily lives. The answer came to him not as a grand decree, but as a quiet certainty, born from the memory of the sunken library's lost wisdom. He would not build a fortress of stone to hoard knowledge. He would found a library of living breath and shared experience. On a cleared plot of land near the central well, he began his work. There were no shelves, no dusty scrolls. Instead, he built a simple circle of smooth, river-worn stones. This would be the heart of his new library. He would sit within the circle, and with the focused intent the Warden had taught him, draw gentle echoes from the river's flow. He did not recite dry histories of kings and battles. He shared the memory of a baker from 1,000 years past who perfected a recipe for honey bread. He let them feel the triumph of an engineer who devised a simple lever to move great stones. He gave them the lullaby a mother once sang to her child, a melody that had been lost to time. This was wisdom made practical, memory made communal, a tapestry of human experience woven directly into the fabric of their lives. The village slowly transformed, not into a place of scholars, but into a beacon of resilient understanding. The children were the first to embrace it, their minds open and unburdened. One afternoon, as he sat with a small group of them, he shared the simple, joyous memory of the first person to ever fly a kite. Their faces lit up with wonder, not at the magic, but at the sheer, relatable delight of the moment. As their laughter mingled with the echo of that ancient joy, a familiar, gentle presence brushed against his mind, a soft pressure like a hand on his shoulder. It was a greeting, sent from a great distance, a ripple of contentment and solidarity from Alara, watching over the river's source. The connection was brief, a single, clear note in the quiet of his thoughts, but it affirmed that his work here was just one part of a much larger, enduring story. The first lesson began at dusk, with the entire village gathered along the riverbank. Anduin did not stand above them, but knelt at the water's edge, his hands resting on the surface, as if greeting an old friend. He asked the river to share the story of its own healing, and the water answered. Harmless, luminous images blossomed above the current, a flash of the spectral Warden's solemn gaze, the crumbling arch of the ancient shrine, the terrifying beauty of the Chrono falls, shattering into a billion memories. The villagers watched mesmerized, as the epic tale they had only heard in fragments unfolded before them in a silent, shimmering dance of light and color. The fear that had once clung to the riverbank like a chill mist began to evaporate, replaced by a hushed and reverent curiosity. For the first time, they saw their past not as a burden to be carried, but as a living tapestry to be witnessed. This new understanding, however, was not universally embraced. An elder named Kale, who had spent a lifetime meticulously transcribing their history onto cured leather scrolls, watched with a deep frown. "You ask us to trust water and whispers," he said, his voice rough with concern. "The written word does not change with the current's mood. It is solid." "It is true. This is a dangerous game, trading stone for a reflection." Anduin felt the weight of the elder's doubt, a tension threatening to divide the very community he sought to unite. He did not argue. Instead, he gently guided Kale to the water and asked the river to show the memory of a long-forgotten drought. The villagers saw their own ancestors, generations past, digging a new well based on a design shown to them in a dream, a design Kale had in his own scrolls, but had never understood. The river provided the context, the feeling of cracked earth and desperate hope, while the scroll preserved the precise measurements of the well's construction. One was the heart of the story, the other its bones. Kale was silent for a long time, looking from the fading image on the water to the scroll in his hands. "I see," he murmured, his defiance softening into a grudging wonder. "The memory is the lifeblood. The word is the skeleton. They are meant to stand together." This reconciliation did more than end a dispute. It wove a new kind of strength into the village's fabric, a resilience born from honoring both tradition and the living flow of time. As the gathering began to disperse, a young girl named Lyra remained at the water's edge, her small hand outstretched. Without any guidance, a single, playful memory image, a butterfly with wings of spun light, drifted from the current and hovered above her palm, pulsing gently in time with her breath. Her natural affinity was a quiet promise, a sign that the river's guardians would no longer walk alone. The butterfly of light dissolved into the river's current as Lyra lowered her hand, her eyes wide with a quiet understanding that seemed far beyond her years. Anduin knew in that moment he was not merely witnessing a curious child, but meeting a successor. He asked her parents for their blessing to teach her, to show her how to navigate the currents of memory without being swept away. Her mother's face tightened with a familiar fear, the memory of the creeping gray still a fresh scar on the village soul. "You ask us to let our daughter walk the same path that nearly consumed you," she said, her voice trembling. "How can we know she will be safe?" Anduin's answer was not a promise of absolute safety, for the river was never without its depths, but a vow of profound responsibility. "I will teach her that the greatest strength lies not in wielding memory, but in respecting it," he told them. "Her first shield will be caution, and her first lesson will be that some echoes are best observed from the shore." With their hesitant trust, a new chapter began. Lyra learned to sit by the water, not demanding stories, but listening with a still and open heart. She learned to distinguish the gentle whisper of a shared joy from the mournful pull of a deep sorrow, understanding that to immerse oneself in the latter required an anchor of present happiness. Her progress was not just rapid, it was revelatory. Where Anduin saw a single, vivid memory of a potter shaping clay, Lyra perceived the entire lineage of the craft. The grandfather who discovered the special clay by the riverbed, the aunt who perfected the glaze, the cousin who traded the pots for seeds that would feed the family for a winter. She saw the interconnected web of lives, the hidden patterns in the tapestry that Anduin, for all his experience, had overlooked. Her gift was not merely hearing the echoes, but understanding the music they created together. This prodigious talent was a double-edged sword. Her parents watched with a mixture of awe and anxiety, their fear a constant, low hum in the background of her lessons. Anduin remained true to his word, tempering her explorations with firm boundaries. He taught her how to build mental walls against the corrosive pull of forgotten tragedies, and how to pull her consciousness back to the present at a moment's notice. He was not just teaching her to access the river, he was teaching her how to leave it. One tranquil afternoon, as Lyra practiced, tracing the origin of a simple folk melody, her brow furrowed in concentration. The river showed her the usual images, the composer humming the tune, the village square where it was first played. But then the vision deepened, shifting unexpectedly. Instead of the past, she saw a familiar figure standing by the distant, thundering Chrono falls. It was Alara. She was not looking at the water, but was gazing eastward, toward their village, a soft, unmistakable smile of pride on her face. The image lasted only a heartbeat before fading, but the feeling it carried lingered, a gentle warmth, a silent acknowledgement passing from the river's source to its newest guardian. The connection was alive, and the future, for the first time, felt not like a burden to be carried, but a story waiting to be lovingly told. A quiet urgency pulsed through the river's whisper the next morning. Anduin sat at the water's edge, his mind still and open, when the current suddenly clarified into a single, coherent vision. Alara stood at the base of the Chrono Falls, but she was not alone. Around her, figures emerged from the mist. A woman whose hair seemed woven from mountain moss, a man whose shadow held the glint of desert stars, others whose forms resonated with the unique energies of distant tributaries. They were the scattered caretakers, the minor guardians from forgotten corners of the world, answering a call that had not been issued in centuries. The vision was an invitation, a sending of immense importance. The river's healing was complete enough to summon its own protectors for a formal convocation, a council to reforge a united guardianship for this new age. The weight of the message settled on Anduin, not as a burden, but as a profound responsibility. He was being summoned not as a student, but as an equal. His immediate thought was for his village. He had just begun to build a stable life here, a delicate balance between the mundane and the magical. How could he leave them now, when their trust was so newly won? The old fear of abandonment, the same whisper that had haunted his first journey, prickled at the edges of his mind. Yet the vision was clear. His duty was no longer confined to this single stretch of riverbank. He was a bridge, and the entire network needed him now. The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. He would bring Lyra. This was not merely a journey. It was the most important lesson she would ever receive, a chance to meet the living tapestry of the river's guardians and understand the vast, interconnected web she was destined to join. He found her by the central well, showing a smaller child how the water could hold the shimmering echo of a soap bubble. When he told her of the vision and the journey ahead, her eyes widened, not with fear, but with a blazing, quiet intensity. The trip would test every skill he had taught her, pushing her abilities far beyond the safe, gentle echoes of their home waters. It would be the final crucible to solidify her place in the new order. Her parents, though anxious, saw the resolve in their daughter's face and the unwavering certainty in Anduin's. They gave their blessing, understanding that some paths must be walked, not just observed. As they packed simple supplies for the long trek upstream, the river itself seemed to sense the significance of their departure. Its current flowed with a newfound vigor, the water chuckling over stones with a sense of eager anticipation, as if guiding them toward a destiny it had patiently waited centuries to unfold. The journey upstream felt like moving through a living, breathing history book. With Lyra by his side, Anduin watched the river change its personality with each new tributary they passed. The water ran deep and silent in one stretch, then burst into playful, chattering rapids in another, each mood reflecting the memories it carried. When the thunder of the Chrono Falls finally reached their ears, it was a sound transformed, no longer a cataclysm, but a grand, orchestral welcome. The basin below the falls was no longer a place of desolation. Guardians stood in quiet clusters, their attire as varied as the lands they came from. A woman from the northern wastes wore robes of woven frost that never melted, while a man from the sun-scorched plains had skin etched with patterns that mirrored the dry riverbeds of his home. Their methods of listening were just as diverse. One guardian read the future in the way bubbles formed and popped on the surface, while another interpreted the past through the subtle scents carried on the mist. This was the Convocation, a gathering not seen since the world was young. The grand ceremony began at dusk. Each guardian, in turn, offered their unique knowledge to the collective pool. Alara wove their disparate techniques into a single, flowing ritual, demonstrating how the northern woman's understanding of icy stillness could calm a turbulent memory, and how the plainsman's knowledge of deep, hidden currents could help locate a lost story. Lyra watched, her mind absorbing the complex symphony of methods, seeing for the first time how the river's protection was a global effort, but harmony was not universal. A guardian named Corbin, whose people had forged their culture in constant war against raiders, stood with a rigid posture. His connection to the river was one of command and control. "This is sentiment, not strategy," he argued, his voice cutting through the shared meditation. "We must build dams, channel the flow, and weaponize the most painful memories against our enemies. To let the river wander as it wishes is to invite chaos." Alara faced him, her calm a stark contrast to his intensity. "The river is not a soldier to be ordered," she replied. "It is a heart that must be allowed to beat. A weaponized memory is a poisoned one, and it will corrupt the one who wields it." The tension threatened to fracture the newfound unity. Anduin felt the eyes of the other guardians turn to him. He was the bridge, the one who had lived in both the mundane world and this mystical one. He did not side with one over the other, but instead spoke of his village's reconciliation between the written scroll and the living echo. "Strength is not the opposite of balance," he said, his voice steady. "Perhaps we can agree on watchtowers instead of dams. We can identify dangerous currents and post guardians to warn others without trying to change the river's fundamental nature." It was a compromise that honored Corbin's desire for vigilance while preserving Alara's core principle of harmony. Corbin gave a slow, grudging nod. "Vigilance, I can respect." The agreement, though fragile, held, as the ceremony concluded with a renewed, powerful vow of unity. A deep-seated relief settled over the gathering. The network was now stronger than it had been in 1,000 years, a united front against any future threat. But as the shared light of the ritual faded, Alara caught Anduin's eye and gestured him away from the celebrating guardians. Her expression was clouded. "There is something else," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the falls. "A memory the river has been reluctant to show me until now. It is not about the blight we defeated, but something that slumbered beneath it." The fall's thunder faded to a low hum as Alara led Anduin away from the celebrating guardians. She stopped where the mist was thickest, her hand hovering over the water's surface. The river here did not whisper or sing. It was profoundly still, a silence that felt deliberate and heavy. She drew a memory from its depths, but this was no story of joy or sorrow. It was a vision of a foundation laid not in stone, but in concept, a prison of woven intention, buried in the river's most ancient layers. Within that sealed darkness, forms shifted, not creatures of flesh or spirit, but entities of pure, active forgetfulness, beings that predated time itself. The Blight they had defeated was not the original evil. It was merely a leak, a symptom of a far deeper, older corruption straining against its bonds. The revelation was a cold stone in Anduin's gut, recontextualizing their entire victory. They had not won a war, they had patched a crack in a dam, holding back an ocean of nothingness. The immediate question was a blade poised over their fragile peace. Should they investigate this prison now, with their newfound unity, and risk disturbing its ancient, fragile seals? Or should they wait, gathering strength and knowledge, while a greater threat slumbered unknowably beneath their feet? The Convocation was divided. Some, like Corbin, saw only a new enemy to be confronted with immediate force. Anduin listened to the arguments, his mind racing. He thought of Lyra's untrained power, of the village just beginning to heal, of the network so recently woven. To charge in blindly was the Blight's own logic, a rush toward oblivion. He stood before the gathered guardians, his voice calm but firm. "We cannot fight what we do not understand," he said. Rushing toward that silence could be the very key that unlocks it. Our victory was built on patience and shared knowledge. Let our first act be one of watchfulness, not war. He convinced them to establish a vigilant watch on the prison, to study its nature and its seals, to learn everything possible before even considering a confrontation. It was a decision for architects, not soldiers. This new knowledge settled over them all, transforming the long-term mission of the Guardianship. Their purpose was no longer simple maintenance of a healed river. It was now a perpetual, vigilant watch on the unquiet depths, a commitment to guard all of memory against a foundational void. As Anduin and Lyra began the journey home, the weight of this new responsibility was a tangible presence, a solemn duty that would shape generations to come. Yet, walking beside the chattering river with a young apprentice who saw the music and the memories, his heart felt strangely light. They were not alone in this watch. They were part of a vast, rediscovered family, united by a purpose greater than any one of them could ever bear alone. The village library was no longer a simple circle of stones. Under Anduin's guidance, it grew into a sheltered amphitheater, its tiers carved from the riverbank itself, where students could sit and listen to the water's whispers. He structured the teachings, creating a curriculum that began with simple listening exercises and progressed to the careful navigation of temporal eddies. The knowledge from the Convocation was woven into every lesson, showing how the Northern Guardian's techniques for calming turbulent thoughts could help a grieving heart, or how the Plainsman's skill in finding hidden currents could locate a lost family story. This new, formalized approach transformed their quiet village into a beacon. Seekers began to arrive, not in a trickle, but in a steady stream. Historians from distant cities, mystics from mountain temples, and everyday people who simply felt a pull toward the water's song. They came seeking answers, healing, or simply the wonder of a living history. This influx, however, stirred a quiet unease among the villagers. Whispers circulated at the communal well. They have only just won their peace, their freedom from the creeping gray. Now these strangers walk their paths, crowd their market, and bring the complexities of the outside world to their doorstep. A protective instinct, born from years of loss, began to harden into resistance. Anduin saw the tension brewing. He could have built walls, literal or social, to preserve their isolation. Instead, he called a town meeting and made a pivotal declaration. The river does not belong to us, he told his people. It never has. We are its caretakers, not its owners. Its memories are a gift to all who approach with a respectful heart. He instituted a policy of radical openness, inviting villagers to share their crafts and travelers to share their stories. The market soon bustled with the scents of foreign spices and the sounds of new languages. A weaver from the village learned an intricate pattern from a traveler, who in turn learned the old song that made the memory lilies bloom. Potential conflict was being woven into a rich tapestry of cultural exchange. The village's reputation solidified, becoming a crucial nexus, a living bridge between the ordinary world and the river's extraordinary magic. Its prosperity was now tied to its purpose. One afternoon, as Anduin demonstrated to a group of visiting scholars how to sense the age of a memory by the texture of its echo, Lyra, who was assisting, suddenly went very still. Her head was cocked, her focus turned inward, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Master," she whispered, her voice cutting through the lesson, "the river. It has a crack in its song." A crack in the river's song was a dissonance that chilled the air itself. Anduin immediately silenced the lesson, his full attention on Lyra as she described the flaw. Not a roar or a scream, but a quiet, persistent wrongness, like a single instrument playing out of tune in a vast orchestra. Together, they followed the discord upstream, away from the bustling village center. The river's main current remained strong and clear, but as they traced a smaller, isolated tributary that wound into a dense thicket, the water grew thin and listless. The memories here were jumbled, their colors faded, their whispers faint and fragmented. It was not the violent consumption of the blight, but a subtle, insidious draining, as if the very essence of these stories was being siphoned away into some unseen void. This was the first tangible sign of the ancient prison stirring, a confirmation that Alara's gravest fears were beginning to manifest. The seals were weakening. The tension was immediate and profound. To raise a general alarm now could trigger panic throughout the village and the newly formed Guardian network. People who had just found their footing might flee in terror, and hard-won unity could shatter into 1,000 pieces of conflicting advice and fear. Anduin made the decision swiftly. "We will go alone," he told Lyra, his voice low and steady. "Just the two of us. We need to see the scope of this with our own eyes, to understand what we are truly facing before we speak a word of it to anyone." It was a terrible gamble to keep such a potential cataclysm secret, but a necessary one. The stakes were incomprehensibly high, dwarfing even their previous battle with the Blight. That had been a fight to restore what was lost. This was a confrontation with the foundational nothingness that sought to unmake reality from its very core. They prepared for their expedition with a quiet efficiency that felt hauntingly familiar. The weight of adventure settled on their shoulders, not as a thrilling call, but as a solemn duty. Anduin packed simple supplies, while Lyra focused her senses, trying to map the extent of the draining effect. It was like trying to trace a single cold thread in a vast, flowing tapestry, a thread that led away from life and light and into a deepening silence. As they shouldered their packs and turned toward the thin, sickly stream, the cheerful sounds of the village at their backs felt like a memory already under threat. The discordant thread of memory led them to a cavern hidden behind a curtain of thorns and hanging moss. Inside, the air was cold and still. A single, thin rivulet of water trickled from a narrow crack in a vast obsidian door that sealed the far wall. The door's surface was covered in intricate runes, but their light was faint, flickering like a guttering candle. This was the source of the sickness the prison Alara had warned them about. They watched, horrified, as the water emerging from the crack was already tainted, its natural shimmer replaced by a dull, lifeless gray. The ancient magic was failing, and forgetfulness itself was seeping into the world. "We are not alone here," Lyra whispered, her voice tight. Before Anduin could respond, a figure stepped from the shadows. It was Corbin, the guardian who had argued for dams and weapons at the Convocation. His face was a mask of stern disapproval. "You were told to watch, not to trespass," he said, his voice echoing in the hollow space. This recklessness could have shattered the last of the seals. "You act alone, but the consequences would be felt by all." Anduin did not flinch or argue. He simply gestured to the weeping crack in the obsidian. "We are not acting alone now, are we?" he replied, his tone calm and measured. He then showed Corbin everything: the faded runes, the draining effect on the tributary, the tangible proof that watchfulness was no longer enough. He turned the accusation into an invitation. "Your strength is what we need here, Corbin, not for war, but for repair. Your people forged bonds of iron and will. Help us forge one now." The logic was inescapable. Corbin's defiance crumbled in the face of the clear and present danger. With a curt nod, he joined them at the door. Their combined efforts were a symphony of different skills. Anduin channeled the river's pure, upstream memories. Lyra wove them into the patterns of the fading runes, and Corbin focused his formidable will, hammering the renewed magic into place with the force of an unbreakable vow. A soft, steady light bloomed across the door's surface, and the trickle of gray water ran clear once more. It was a temporary fix, a patch on a foundation that was crumbling. The effort left them all breathless, and the truth was undeniable. This was a reprieve, not a solution. A permanent fix would require the knowledge and power of every guardian, working in perfect unison. As the new light glowed on the obsidian, Anduin closed his eyes and sent his consciousness racing upstream, following the current back to its source. He formed a single, clear thought, a message of utmost urgency meant for one mind alone. "Alara," he called out across the vast distance. "The prison stirs. Gather the Convocation. We have no time to lose." The first guardian arrived with the dawn, a solitary figure whose footsteps seemed to quiet the morning birds. Then more came, from every corner of the known world, converging on the village until the air itself hummed with a chorus of ancient dialects and focused power. Their small home had become a command center, a living fortress against the coming storm. Every cottage offered shelter, every hearth cooked for the gathered multitude. The villagers, once fearful of outsiders, now worked with a fierce, determined pride, gathering rare herbs and polishing river stones for the monumental ritual ahead. They understood their humble homes were the last line of defense for all of history. In the central amphitheater, the debate was anything but humble. Corbin stood firm, his voice like grinding stone. "We must pour all our strength into the seals," he argued. We forge a barrier of pure will, a wall so thick nothing can ever seep through again. It is the only way to be sure. Others, especially those who communed with the river's deeper sorrows, shook their heads. A healer named Lyra spoke with a gentle but unyielding resolve. A wall only contains the sickness, it does not cure it. The corrupted memories will fester and grow, and their pressure will one day shatter even the strongest seal. We must attempt to heal the wound, not just bandage it. Anduin listened to the arguments, feeling the weight of his own journey. He had seen the cost of both pure force and pure subtlety. He stepped forward, his historical knowledge providing a third path. The first guardians did not choose one over the other, he explained. Their greatest works were symphonies. He proposed a hybrid ritual, a structure where Corbin and the warriors would provide the foundational power, a framework of immense strength. Within that framework, the healers like Lyra would work, carefully unraveling the threads of corruption and restoring the forgotten memories to clarity. It was a plan that honored every tradition in the Convocation. The stakes of their decision were absolute. Failure was not an option, anyone could survive. If the ancient entities of oblivion were fully unleashed, they would not simply destroy the present. They would unravel the past, severing the chain of cause and effect until the world became a hollow place with no history, no stories, and no reason to exist. The very concept of memory would become a phantom pain in a universe of static. This understanding settled over the village, a silent dread that fueled their frantic, precise preparations. As the sun dipped below the horizon on the eve of the ritual, a profound and unsettling stillness fell. The river, usually a constant, comforting murmur, grew perfectly calm, its surface becoming a mirror of the starry sky. It was holding its breath, waiting for them